When my sister and I left the orphanage, all we received was Grandma's farmland. But the markings in the cornfield weren't natural. What we discovered there wasn't just about the past. It was about a future we never knew we had the right to claim. If you've ever felt like your story was written for you by someone else, and you're looking for the strength to pick up the pen yourself, subscribe and stick around. Your people are here. The final gate of the Northgate Youth Services Center didn't so much swing open as it grudgingly scraped its way across the asphalt. It made a sound like a dying animal, a low groan of rusted metal that I'd heard every day for 6 years. But this was the first time I was on the leaving side of it. I was 18. Officially, I was an adult. Officially, I was free. I felt neither of those things. All I felt was the thin, useless fabric of my state-issued jacket against a wind that had teeth. Beside me, my sister Maya, who was 16 and still had 2 years left on her sentence, shivered. She wasn't supposed to be out yet, but I was her only family. Through a mountain of paperwork and the weary signature of a judge who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, I had become her legal guardian. It was a title that felt as flimsy as my jacket. We stood on the sidewalk, a duffel bag each at our feet, containing the sum total of our worldly possessions. A few changes of clothes, some worn paperbacks, and the hollow echo of a childhood spent waiting. The building behind us was a monument to beige bureaucracy, a place where feelings went to be filed away and forgotten. We didn't look back. There was nothing to see. The bus stop was 100 yards down the road, its plastic shelter cloudy with grime. Every step toward it felt like walking on a planet with heavier gravity. "So," Maya said, her voice small, a little puff of white in the cold air. "Now what?" That was the question, wasn't it? It was the question that had been squatting in my chest for months, a heavy, silent thing with no answers. I was supposed to have a plan. That's what adults did. They had plans. My plan consisted of a bus ticket and a piece of paper in my pocket that felt more like a judgment than a gift. Our final meeting had been with Ms. Albright, our case manager for the last 2 years. Her office smelled of stale coffee and industrial-strength air freshener, trying to cover up the scent of quiet desperation. She was a woman who was good at maintaining a professional distance, her face a carefully neutral mask. But that day, her eyes held something that looked almost like pity, and I hated it. She slid a thick manila envelope across her desk. "This is it, Alex," she said. "The deed to your grandmother's property. It's been held in trust until your 18th birthday. It's yours now. Yours and Maya's." I picked it up. It was heavy, weighted with the history of a life we barely remembered. I remembered her house, vaguely. The smell of baking bread and damp soil. The feel of her calloused hands. And then, nothing. Just the sterile quiet of the system that swallowed us after she was gone. "There's also this," Ms. Albright added, pushing a small, dusty cardboard box forward. "Her personal effects, what was left." I didn't want the box. I didn't want the farm. I wanted a grandmother who hadn't died, who hadn't left us to be raised by schedules and shift workers. I wanted parents who hadn't been ghosts in our lives long before they were gone for good. But you don't get what you want. You get what you're given. And we were given a box and a deed to a piece of forgotten land in a town we couldn't find on a map. I took it, the rough cardboard scratching my fingers. "Is there money?" I asked, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. It was a raw, necessary question. Ms. Albright's expression tightened. "The property taxes are paid up for the year. After that, it's your responsibility. The estate had no liquid assets. I'm sorry." Sorry. It was a word we heard a lot. It was a word that did nothing. It was a period at the end of a sentence that offered no comfort. We took the bus. 3 transfers and 10 hours of watching the world blur past the window. We started in the dense gray heart of the city, a landscape of concrete and steel that felt familiar in its indifference. Then came the sprawling suburbs, with their identical houses and manicured lawns, a life so alien it might as well have been on the moon. And then, finally, the world opened up. The buildings fell away, replaced by wide, empty fields lying dormant under a pale winter sky. The sky got bigger. The world got quieter. Maya fell asleep against my shoulder, her breathing a soft, steady rhythm against the drone of the engine. I stayed awake, watching the miles dissolve behind us, the manila envelope a heavy square against my leg. I felt like we were traveling not toward something, but away from everything. We were 2 little boats cut loose from our moorings, set adrift on a vast, gray ocean. The last bus dropped us at a crossroads with a single, blinking yellow light. The town of Havenwood wasn't so much a town as a suggestion of one. A gas station with peeling paint, a diner with a flickering neon sign, a post office, and a handful of houses that looked tired, their shoulders slumped against the wind. The sun was setting, bleeding orange and purple across the horizon, and the air was sharp and clean, smelling of pine and cold earth. It was so quiet. After years of living with the constant noise of 100 other kids, the shouting, the televisions, the slamming doors, the silence was deafening. It pressed in on my eardrums. A pickup truck rattled past, the man behind the wheel giving us a long, curious look. We were outsiders. It was written all over us, in our cheap clothes and our lost expressions. The farm was another 2 miles down a dirt road. We walked, our duffel bags digging into our shoulders. The road was rutted and uneven, and darkness was gathering in the trees that lined it. Every snap of a twig in the woods made me jump. I felt exposed, vulnerable. In the group home, there was always a sense of safety in the routine, in the locked doors. Out here, there was nothing but space, and it was terrifying. We saw the mailbox first, a rusty metal box leaning on a crooked post, the name Rosewood barely visible beneath a layer of grime. Our grandmother's name, my mother's name, a name that felt like it belonged to a stranger. The driveway was a tunnel of overgrown trees, their branches clawing at the sky. And then we saw it, the house. It was a simple 2-story farmhouse, its white paint peeling away to show the weathered gray wood beneath. The windows were dark, like vacant eyes. The porch sagged in the middle, and the screen door hung from a single hinge, swaying gently in the breeze. To the right of the house, a massive barn stood like a silent, hunched giant, its roofline a dark silhouette against the fading light. And all around it, stretching out as far as the eye could see, were the fields. Even in the dim light, I could see them. Acres and acres of dead brown cornstalks standing in rigid rows like a skeletal army. The place didn't feel like a home. It felt like a grave. "It's big," Maya whispered, her voice filled with an awe that I couldn't share. All I saw was the decay. All I felt was the crushing weight of another place that didn't want us. Inside the box from Ms. Albright, there was a key. It was old and iron, heavy in my palm. It fit the lock on the front door, which groaned in protest as I turned it. The air that hit us from inside was thick and stale. The smell of dust, disuse, and something else. Something faintly sweet, like dried flowers. We stepped inside, and I fumbled for a light switch. I flicked it up and down. Nothing. The power was off. Of course it was. We stood in the dark entryway, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the grimy windows. It cast long, distorted shadows across the room, making the furniture, draped in white sheets, look like a gathering of ghosts. This wasn't a fresh start. This was a haunted house. This was my grandmother's final, cruel joke, leaving us a broken-down farm with no money, no power, nothing but the ghosts of a life we never got to have. The anger I'd been carrying for years, a cold, hard knot in my stomach, tightened. I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch a wall. Instead, I just stood there in the suffocating silence, listening to my sister breathe beside me. That first night, we slept on the floor in the living room, huddled together in our jackets for warmth, using our duffel bags as pillows. Sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the old house, every sigh of the wind outside sounded like an intruder. I lay awake for hours, staring up at a ceiling I couldn't see, the feeling of utter failure washing over me. I was 18. I was a guardian, and I had led my sister to a cold, dark, empty house in the middle of nowhere, with nothing to our names. Sometime in the deep, silent hours of the morning, I heard a small sound beside me. It was Maya, crying. Not loud, just quiet, hitching sobs she was trying to stifle. I didn't say anything. I just reached out in the dark and found her hand, lacing my fingers through hers. Her hand was freezing. We lay there like that for a long time. Two lost children holding on to each other in the dark. And I made a silent promise that I had no idea how I would keep. I would find a way. I had to. The next morning, the world looked different. The sun, weak as it was, streamed through the dirty windows, cutting through the gloom and illuminating billions of dust motes dancing in the air. The house was still dilapidated, but in the light of day it looked less like a tomb and more like a place that had simply been sleeping. We explored. We pulled the sheets off the furniture, revealing solid, simple wooden pieces. A sturdy dining table, a sofa with worn floral upholstery, bookshelves filled with books. In the kitchen, the cupboards were empty, but the pots and pans hanging from a rack were heavy and real. It was a house that had been lived in, loved in. My anger from the night before began to soften, replaced by a dull, confusing ache. We found the breaker box in the cellar, and with a series of loud clunks, managed to get the power back on. The lights flickered to life, casting a warm, yellow glow. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. We spent the day cleaning. We swept away thick layers of dust, scrubbed floors, and washed windows. With every bit of grime we removed, it felt like we were letting a little more light in, both into the house and into ourselves. It was hard physical work, and it was good. It kept my mind from spiraling. By late afternoon we were exhausted, but the house was breathing again. We had found a small stash of canned goods in the pantry, beans, soup, peaches, and a can opener in a drawer. It felt like a feast. We sat at the clean kitchen table, eating cold beans straight from the can, and for the first time, I saw a genuine smile on Maya's face. "It's not so bad," she said. "It could be home." I wanted to believe her, I really did, but the feeling of dread hadn't completely left me. This was all temporary. The taxes were paid for the year, but a year goes by fast when you have nothing. The problem, the real, crushing problem of our survival, was still there, waiting just outside the clean windows. It was Maya who first noticed the markings. She was looking out the upstairs bedroom window, the one that overlooked a vast cornfield behind the house. "Alex, come look at this," she said, her voice puzzled. I went and stood beside her. From ground level, the field was just a chaotic tangle of dead stalks. But from up here, with the low afternoon sun casting long shadows, you could see it. There were patterns in the field. They weren't crop circles, those perfect geometric shapes you see in pictures. These were different. They were subtle, flowing lines, almost like rivers or veins etched into the landscape. Some lines were thicker, where the stalks seemed to be sparser, the soil darker. Others were faint, almost invisible. They weren't random. They converged and branched out, forming a vast, intricate network that covered the entire property. It looked intentional. "What is that?" Maya breathed. I had no idea. It was strange, unsettling. It felt like a language I didn't understand, written on a scale I couldn't comprehend. We stood there for a long time, watching as the sun sank lower, the shadows deepening, making the lines stand out in stark relief. It was like the land itself was trying to tell us something. For the next few days, the mystery of the fields consumed us. We walked the lines, trying to make sense of them. Up close, it was harder to see the overall pattern. We were like ants crawling on a giant blueprint, but we could feel the difference. In the places where the lines were darkest, the earth under our feet felt different, softer, richer. The air smelled sweeter. It was bizarre. We found the barn was filled with old, rusted farm equipment, things I didn't have the first clue how to use. There were also bags of seeds, tools, and stacks of notebooks in a small, dusty office. The notebooks were my grandmother's. Her handwriting was a neat, elegant script, a stark contrast to the rough, working nature of the barn. They were farm journals, filled with details about crop rotations, weather patterns, and soil composition. But interspersed with the agricultural data were strange notes. Phrases like, "The north line is weak this year," or "Follow the water vein to the heart," or "The earth remembers what we plant in it." It was more poetry than farming. It didn't make any sense. The real breakthrough came a week later. We were running low on the canned food, and the reality of our situation was setting in again. We needed money. We needed a plan. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the small cardboard box of our grandmother's effects, the one we'd barely looked at since we arrived. I had been avoiding it. It felt too final, too sad. But desperation was a powerful motivator. I opened it. Inside, nestled in yellowed tissue paper, was a collection of small, ordinary things. A pair of reading glasses, a silver thimble, a bundle of dried lavender that still held a faint scent, and at the bottom, a thick stack of envelopes, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. They were letters. They were addressed to my Alex and my Maya. They had never been mailed. My hands were trembling as I untied the ribbon. The postmarks were all local, dating back 6 years, starting just a few weeks after we were taken into the system. One for every month. 72 letters. A chronicle of the years we had lost. I opened the first one. The date was a raw, fresh wound. October 16th. 2 weeks after her funeral, the day we were moved to Northgate. "My dearest children," it began, her familiar script blurring through the tears that instantly filled my eyes. "I don't know if you will ever read this. They tell me I cannot contact you. They say it is for the best, to allow you to adjust. There is no adjusting to having your heart torn out. I am writing this anyway. I am writing because I need you to know that this was not my choice. not in the way you might think. I did not abandon you. I saved you. I had to stop reading. The words were a physical blow. I couldn't breathe. Saved us. She had left us. She had died and left us to be swallowed by the system. That was abandonment. It was the simple, ugly truth I had built my life around. Maya put her hand on my arm. "What does it say?" I couldn't speak. I just handed her the letter. We sat there, in the quiet, sun-drenched kitchen, and began to read. We read through the letters one by one, piecing together the story we never knew. The truth that had been buried for 6 long years. It wasn't a simple story. It was a story of desperation, of fear, and of a love so fierce it was willing to break its own heart to keep its promises. Our parents, her son and his wife, hadn't just been unlucky. They had been reckless. They had fallen in with the wrong people, a local syndicate that preyed on struggling farmers, offering loans with impossible terms. They got in deep, deeper than anyone knew. When they couldn't pay, the threats started, first against them, then against us. Grandma tried to help. She sold off small parcels of her land, anything she could to pay their debts. But it was never enough. The hole was too deep. The night our parents died, in that car crash the police had called an accident, Grandma knew it wasn't. It was a message. "They came to the house the next day," she wrote in a letter dated a week after the crash, her handwriting shaky and erratic. 2 men in a clean black car. They didn't have to say who they were. They told me the debt was now mine. They said it was a shame what happened to your parents, and it would be an even bigger shame if something were to happen to 2 beautiful children. They looked right at you, Alex, as you were playing on the floor. The look in that man's eyes, it was like looking at a snake. They gave me a choice. I could sign the rest of the farm over to them, everything, and they would take you as collateral until I found a way to earn you back. Or there was another way. A man they knew, a man on the inside of the state system. He could make you disappear. Not in a bad way, they said, in a safe way. You would become wards of the state. You would be lost in the paperwork, untraceable. In exchange, the debt would be wiped clean. The condition was that I could never see you again, never contact you. To them, I had to be a stranger. It was the only way to guarantee they would leave you alone, to make you worthless to them. An abandoned child is a liability, not an asset. I felt sick. The room was spinning. All those years, I had built a narrative of a grandmother who was too weak, too grief-stricken to fight for us. I had resented her for it. I had let that bitterness curdle inside me, hardening my heart. And the truth was, she had made an impossible choice. She had chosen our safety over her own heart. She had let us believe she had abandoned us, had let the whole world believe it, because that belief was the very shield that was protecting us. She had sacrificed her reputation, her connection to us, her everything. She hadn't abandoned us. She had hidden us in plain sight. The letters continued. She wrote about her loneliness, about the crushing silence of the house. She wrote about her work in the fields. And that's when the strange markings started to make sense. "I am not just farming, my darlings," she explained in a letter from the following spring. "I am preparing your inheritance. This land is special. Your grandfather knew it. It's not just dirt and clay. There are deep veins of volcanic soil running through it, rich in minerals you can't find anywhere else. The lines you might see one day, they are not random. I am using a technique called deep soil conditioning. I am tracing those veins, enriching them, bringing their nutrients to the surface. I am making this land not just fertile, but unique. One day, someone will recognize its value. A corporation, maybe. They will want to buy it. They will offer you money, more money than you can imagine, and you can take it. You will deserve it. It will be your payment for the childhood that was stolen from you. But I am also giving you another choice, the land itself. It is a living thing. It is your history. It is your future. If you choose to fight for it, the choice will be yours. The easy path or the right one. I pray you are strong enough to choose. We read until our eyes were raw and the sun had set. We read through 6 years of a life lived for us in secret. We read about her declining health, the cancer she never told anyone about. And we read the final letter. It was short, the handwriting weak but determined. I am tired now, my loves. I don't have much time. I have paid the taxes ahead for as long as I could. I have left you the house. I have left you the land. It is all I have. It is my whole heart. Know that every seed I planted with a prayer for you. Every line I tilled in the earth was a letter I could not send. I love you. I have always loved you. Be good to each other. Your Grandma Rose. I couldn't hold it back anymore. The grief I had suppressed for 6 years, the anger, the confusion, it all came pouring out of me in a wave of racking sobs. I cried for the grandmother I had misunderstood. I cried for the childhood we had lost. I cried for the parents I barely remembered. And I cried out of shame for the hardness in my own heart. Maya held me, her own tears streaming down her face, and for the first time since we had left Northgate, we weren't just 2 survivors clinging to a raft. We were family, anchored by a truth that was both devastating and beautiful. We were the inheritors of a great and terrible love. In that moment of shared grief, everything shifted. The farm was no longer a burden. The house was no longer a tomb. They were a gift, a legacy, a last will and testament written not on paper, but into the very earth itself. Our grandmother hadn't left us with nothing. She had left us with a choice. And as I looked at Maya, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes clear and steady, I knew which one we had to make. The very next morning, as if on cue, a car pulled up the long driveway. It was a sleek black sedan, the kind that looks out of place on a dirt road, like a shark in a freshwater pond. A man in a crisp suit got out. He was holding a briefcase. He walked up to the porch where I was sitting, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. He had a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Alex Miller?" he asked. I nodded, my heart pounding. "My name is Mr. Davison. I'm a representative for the Argent Development Group. We've been trying to reach the owner of this property for some time." He didn't offer to shake my hand. He just opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "I'll get straight to the point. This land is part of a major agricultural expansion project we're undertaking. We are prepared to offer you a very generous sum for it, $500,000. The number hung in the air between us. $500,000. It was an astronomical figure. It was more money than I could even comprehend. It was a ticket out, a new life, a clean slate. No more worrying about taxes or food or our future. I could see it all laid out before me. A nice apartment in the city, college for Maya, stability, security, everything I had ever dreamed of for us. It was the easy path, the one our grandmother had said we would deserve. I looked past him at the fields. The sun was hitting them just right, and the lines, the veins of rich, dark earth were clearly visible. I saw them now not as a mystery, but as a map, a story, a promise. I thought of my grandmother on her hands and knees, toiling under the sun, pouring her love and her hope into that soil. I thought of the choice she had made, giving up everything to keep us safe. Mr. Davison was still talking. "This is a one-time offer, kid. Frankly, the land isn't worth half that. It's overgrown. The house is a tear-down. We're being generous. If you refuse, well, things can get complicated. Eminent domain, legal challenges. It gets expensive. This is the clean way out." There it was. The threat wrapped in a thin veneer of corporate politeness. These were the people. Maybe not the same men, but the same kind. The kind that saw land not as a home, but as a number on a balance sheet. The kind that saw people as obstacles. I looked him straight in the eye, the same cold, dead look my grandmother had described, the snake's eyes. "The answer is no," I said. My voice didn't shake. "The land is not for sale." For a second, Mr. Davison looked genuinely surprised. The fake smile dropped from his face. "You're making a big mistake, kid." "I don't think I am," I said, standing up. I was taller than him. It was a small thing, but it mattered. "This is our home. You're not welcome here. Please leave." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. Then he snapped his briefcase shut. "You'll regret this," he said, turning on his heel. He got back in his car, and a moment later it was gone, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the air. I stood on the porch, my heart still hammering, but my hands were steady. I had made a choice, the right one, the hard one, and I wasn't scared, I was terrified. But I was also, for the first time in my life, truly free. Now, if you've ever had to make a choice like that, a choice where your head is screaming one thing, but your heart is screaming another, I want you to hit that like button. It's a small way of saying you understand that the hardest paths are often the ones that lead us home. Let me know in the comments about a time you chose the difficult road. Your story matters here. This community is built on people who get it. The immediate aftermath of that decision was a strange mix of exhilaration and panic. We had stared down the dragon, but now we had to live in its shadow. We knew they would be back. People like that don't just give up. But for now, we had work to do. We had a farm to save. We took our grandmother's journals from the barn and spread them out on the kitchen table. They became our Bible. We cross-referenced her notes with old agricultural maps we found in the attic, tracing the mineral veins she had so carefully cultivated. It was a language we were slowly learning to speak, the language of the land. We learned about pH balances, about nitrogen fixation, about companion planting. We learned that our grandmother wasn't just a farmer. She was a scientist, an artist, a steward of this place. The work was brutal. We were two teenagers with no experience, trying to resurrect a farm that had been neglected for years. We started with a small patch, the one our grandmother had called the heart in her journals, where several of the richest soil veins converged. We spent days clearing the dead corn stalks, our hands blistering and our muscles aching in ways we never knew they could. We had to fix the old rototiller we found in the barn using a manual we downloaded on the spotty library Wi-Fi in town and parts we ordered with the last of our meager cash. Every small success felt like a miracle. The day the tiller engine coughed to life, sputtering black smoke, we whooped and cheered like we'd won the lottery. We began to meet the locals, not as the two strange orphans who had appeared out of nowhere, but as the Rosewood grandchildren. We went to the hardware store for supplies, and the owner, a grizzled old man named George, looked at me over his glasses. "You've got your grandmother's eyes," he said. "She was a tough woman, stubborn as a mule. Good to see some life back in that place." He told us stories about her quiet strength and her fierce independence. He gave us a discount on seeds and pointed us toward an old farmer down the road, a man named Eli, who had been our grandfather's best friend. Eli was a man who seemed to be carved from the earth itself. He was in his late 70s, with hands like gnarled roots and a face weathered by a lifetime of sun and wind. He came over to the farm one afternoon, walking slowly up the drive. He didn't say much at first. He just walked the fields with us, crumbling the dark soil between his fingers. He knelt down at the heart, smelled the earth, and nodded slowly. "Your grandma knew," he said, his voice a low rumble. "She always said this land had a soul. People thought she was crazy. She wasn't crazy. She was listening." Eli became our mentor. He taught us things no book could. He showed us how to read the sky, how to feel the coming rain in the air. He taught us the rhythm of the seasons, the patience of planting, the faith of waiting for a harvest. He never once questioned our decision to stay. He just showed up, day after day, with his quiet wisdom and his steady presence. With his help, and with the guidance of our grandmother's journals, we planted our first crop. Not corn, but a specialized variety of heirloom herbs and vegetables that the journals said would thrive in the mineral-rich soil. It was a gamble. It was everything we had. The developers didn't stay away for long. The letters started coming. Official-looking documents from law firms, citing zoning regulations we didn't understand, questioning the legality of my guardianship over Maya, threatening us with legal action. Then the surveyors came, planting little orange flags along our property line, a silent, creeping invasion. It was a war of attrition designed to wear us down, to make us feel small and powerless. And some days it worked. There were nights I lay awake, the fear a cold knot in my stomach, convinced we had made a terrible mistake. I was just a kid playing at being a farmer, an adult, a guardian. I was in over my head. But then morning would come, and I would see the first green shoots pushing their way up through the dark earth in the field. Tiny, defiant signs of life. And I would get up, and I would go back to work. Maya was my rock. While I was consumed with the fear and the fight, she was the one who was truly building a home. She painted the rooms, planted a flower garden by the porch, and filled the house with the smell of baking, using our grandmother's old recipes. She brought the soul back into the place. She was the one who reminded me why we were fighting. We weren't just fighting for a piece of land. We were fighting for her flower garden. We were fighting for the right to sit at our own kitchen table. We were fighting for the memory of a woman who had given everything for us. We were fighting for the future she had planted in the ground. The harvest came in late summer. The fields, which had been a sea of dead brown stalks when we arrived, were now bursting with color and life. The herbs were so fragrant you could smell them from the road. The vegetables were vibrant and rich. Eli brought the owner of a fancy restaurant from a city 2 hours away to see our crop. The chef walked through our fields, his eyes wide. He tasted a tomato straight from the vine, and he closed his eyes, speechless for a moment. "Incredible," he whispered. "The minerality, the depth of flavor. I've never tasted anything like it." He bought our entire harvest on the spot, for a price that made my head spin. It wasn't $500,000, but it was enough. It was enough to pay the coming year's taxes. It was enough to buy a used truck. It was enough to fix the roof. It was enough to breathe. It was a beginning. A few months ago, on what would have been our grandmother's birthday, Maya and I took a blanket out to the middle of the field, to the heart. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery colors. The farm was quiet, peaceful. The legal battles with Argent Development were still ongoing, but they felt distant, their threats less potent. We had won the first round. We had allies now, a community at our back. We had the land, and the land was providing for us. We had each other. We had made a home. I lay back and looked up at the vast, open sky, a sky that had once seemed so terrifying and empty. Now, it felt like a promise. "Do you think she knows?" Maya asked, her voice soft. "Do you think she can see us?" I didn't know anything about heaven or what comes after, but I knew about the earth beneath my back. I knew about the love that had been poured into it, a love that was still nourishing us, still feeding us, still holding us. "Yeah," I said, and I believed it. "I think she knows." Home isn't a place you are given. It's not just four walls and a roof. I've learned that home is a story. It's a choice you make every single day, to show up, to fight, to cultivate, to love. It's the truth you dig for, even when it hurts. It's the legacy you choose to honor. For so long, my story was about what I had lost. It was a story of abandonment, of being a victim of the system. But this farm, this land, these letters from my grandmother, they gave me a new story. It's a story about a love that was stronger than fear, a story about sacrifice, and a story about two kids who learned to grow roots in the hardest ground. It's not a perfect story. There are still scars. There are still days when the fear creeps in. But it's our story, and we're the ones writing it now. And that's really what this is all about. It's about taking the pen back. So many of us feel like our lives are just happening to us, that we're trapped by our past, by the labels people put on us. But the truth is, you always have a choice. It might be a hard one, it might be terrifying, but you can choose to dig for the truth. You can choose to fight for your own patch of ground, whatever that looks like for you. You can choose to write a new chapter. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like you were fighting for your own sense of home, I want you to subscribe and become part of this community. Share your story in the comments below. I read every one. Because every story of survival, of resilience, of choosing the harder right over the easier wrong, deserves to be heard. You are not alone in your fight. Thank you for listening.